In Hollywood, there's an old adage that suggests there are no original stories left, only unique ways of telling them. In the case of directorial wunderkind Zack Snyder, he learned his lesson the hard way after finding massive success in his first 3 theatrical releases by adapting Dawn of the Dead, 300, and the monumental smash hit Watchmen, before suffering a hurtful and humbling blow with Sucker Punch, a wildly misguided big-budget spectacle based on an original idea that bombed hard at the box office. Unfortunately, the film fared even worse with critics and casual moviegoers alike, forcing Snyder to avoid pursuing original movie concepts and return to adapting IPO existing comic book fare for the next 10 years until the release of Army of the Dead. But is the commercial and critical failure of Sucker Punch really an indictment of an ill-conceived original premise and poor execution? Digging deeper, that's certainly part of it, but several other factors need to be taken into account. Consider the following. What happens when you mix an inflated sense of egotistical self-indulgence of a white-hot director coming off 3 hit films, studio enablement that limits checks and balances due to such success, an unclear target demographic, lack of a movie star draw, and a woefully mismanaged marketing campaign, and a pricey 3D format that was ultimately axed during production? Well, for Snyder, the result was, ironically, one giant gobsmacking sucker punch. Now that a decade has transpired, let's pull this bad boy off the mat, dust the sucker off, and find out once and for all, what the happened to this movie? Although Sucker Punch is Zack Snyder's first movie based on one of his original ideas, he clearly channeled Lewis Carroll as an inspiration, describing the project to coming soon as Alice in Wonderland with machine guns. Snyder began working on Sucker Punch in 2007, but put the script aside to focus on Watchmen. Upon resuming, Snyder co-wrote the screenplay with Steve Shabuya, who has neither written a script of note before nor since, and produced the movie with his wife, Deborah Snyder, through their Cruel and Unusual Films production shingle. According to Snyder in a March 2007 interview with Coming Soon, a while ago, I had written a script for myself and there was a sequence in it that made me think, how can I make a film that can have action sequences in it that aren't limited by the physical realities that normal people are limited by, but still have the story make sense? So it's not, and I don't mean to be mean, like a bullshit thing like Ultraviolet or something like that. And also, I was really inspired by the worlds of movies like Moulin Rouge, which is modern but at the same time timeless. One issue that seemed to plague Sucker Punch early on was Warner Brothers' blind eagerness to distribute the movie based solely on the success of Snyder's 300 and Watchmen. In 2009, Snyder voiced his desire to make an R-rated film like his past studio successes, but later claimed he always meant for Sucker Punch to be rated PG-13. With Warner Brothers accommodating the flip-flop, this lack of a clear-cut vision must have sidetracked the overall direction of where Sucker Punch was aimed. After the film was shot, Snyder cut several scenes in order to ensure a PG-13 rating for the MPAA, which was a vexing process for the filmmaker. 100%, he said. It was 100% frustrating trying to have to live in that box when you build this crazy thing. It's like you build this super crazy impersonal thing, then through a series of conversations or criticisms or whatever, I mean, I know what world I live in, so I'm not bitter about it, but you just end up with a different sort of movie. By March 2009, Snyder began the casting process for Sucker Punch. Amanda Seyfried was initially tapped to play the lead role of Baby Doll, a young woman trapped in a psychiatric hospital who retreats to the fantastical corners of her warped mind to cope with the horrors of institutionalization. When the actress was forced to bow out due to her commitment to HBO's Big Love, the relatively unknown Australian actress Emily Browning was cast instead. Emma Stone, Brie Larson, Freida Pinto, and Evan Rachel Wood also auditioned for major parts in the movie, but in the end, it was the far less known Jena Malone, Abbie Cornish, Jamie Chung, and Vanessa Hudgens that were cast in key roles. Even Angelina Jolie was considered for the supporting role of Dr. Vera Gorski, before Carla Gugino was ultimately cast. Now, not to besmirch the skills and talents of any of those actors, but they say 80 to 90% of directing is casting, and the lack of recognizable movie stars in Sucker Punch certainly hindered Snyder's chances for his only original movie idea heretofore to resonate among the masses. It's one thing to populate a mega popular adaptation of a graphic novel like 300 and Watchmen without movie stars and still find success thanks to its massive built-in fanbase. It's quite another entirely to do so with an original movie idea. especially one as misguided and poorly executed as Sucker Punch. Whether scheduling snafus or not, it's hard to envision what the movie would look like with Seyfried, Stone, Larson, and Wood leading the show. Of course, hindsight is 2020, and there's arguably no way Snyder could have anticipated what massive superstars said actresses have since ascended to. Given the grueling physical requirements of the film shoot, the lead actor spent 12 weeks training extensively in Los Angeles before and during principal photography. Browning and her co-stars were trained to deadlift up to 250 pounds. As he did on 300 and Watchmen, Damon Caro coordinated the stunts, choreographed the fight sequences, and designed the action for Sucker Punch. Cornish told the LA Times that her daily regimen consisted of training 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in martial arts, swords, and weaponless choreography. Additionally, Malone informed Wired that her daily grind entailed 4 hours of warm-ups and Wushu MMA training, followed by 3 hours of weightlifting, firearms training, tactical positioning, and of course, pole dancing. The reason these training regimens are mentioned is that Vanessa Hudgens, who joined the training sessions after the other leads, broke down several times during the experience, which she described as tormenting. In the scenes where her character Blondie is seen crying on screen, Hudgens used real tears from her physically taxing training experience. Art imitates life indeed. Armed with an $82 million budget, pre-production on Sucker Punch spanned from June to September 2009. With production offices shifting from LA to Vancouver in the interim. Principal photography on the film officially commenced in Vancouver on September 10th, 2009 and lasted until January 22nd, 2010, giving Snyder a good 4.5 months to capture his lofty vision on camera. According to the province, Snyder's vision was fetishistic and personal. I like to think that my fetishes aren't that obscure. Who doesn't want to see girls running down the trenches of World War I wreaking havoc? I'd always had an interest in those worlds. Comic books, fantasy art, animated films. I'd like to see this. That's how I approach everything, and then keep pushing it from there. In order to achieve the hyper-stylized aesthetic he was going for, Snyder hired production designer Rick Carter, visual effects company Animal Logic, and moving picture company to handle roughly 120 digital shots in the film. In terms of digital tech, part of the plan from the outset was to release the movie in 3D, the popular format du jour ushered in by the success of Avatar in 2009. However, after spending invaluable time and money on the 3D post-conversion process, Snyder and Warner Brothers decided to pull the plug on the pricey exhibition format. Snyder relayed the following to MTV in 2010. We've looked at a bunch of conversions, so whether or not we have the time to do it right, I'm not going to do it if we don't have the time to really be meticulous with it. It's such an awesome piece of work and everyone's worked so hard to make it awesome, so I don't want to screw it up with bad 3D. About that conversion process, Deborah Snyder said, "There are very few vendors out there that are doing conversions. There are all these movies that want to be converted and we just haven't felt like we've seen that proof yet. Visually, Zack's done an amazing job. It's such a spectacle in and of itself, and it's so fantastical that it doesn't really need the 3D. So, as you can see, despite all the awesome footage captured during principal photography, the exhibition plans for the film were unsettled at best and disorganized at worst during the production phase, which surely played a factor in the movie's box office failures. Despite Snyder's attempt to craft, quote, a cool story and not just like a video game where you're just loose and going nuts, his overindulgent appetite to blend Asian iconography, especially Japanese samurai anime and mecha cultural elements, into one whole, the result, as most critics would agree, is a jumbled, largely incoherent morass of sexy violent imagery that resembles an extended 110-minute music video. Which kinda makes sense considering Snyder's background shooting music videos for Morrissey and ZZ Top. Indeed, music and dance play a vital role in the sensorial sights and sounds of Sucker Punch. Rather than expressing thoughts and feelings through speech, composer Tyler Bates claimed the songs in the film, quote, function as the subconscious mind of Baby Doll and her journey, while the musical producer added that it was, quote, an important task of the songs to signplace which particular world you were inhabiting at a particular moment. As Baz Luhrmann did with Moulin Rouge, Snyder opted to use pre-existing pop songs for needle drops in the movie, creating a wall-to-wall musical backdrop that drives the narrative forward. In her impressive debut, Browning recorded 3 songs used in the movie, including Asleep, Sweet Dreams, and Where's My Mind. Yet, for all the intense dance training the female cast endured, Snyder was forced to cut most of the elaborate dance sequences from the final cut due to time constraints, many of which he promised to reinsert in the recently resurrected director's cut, which we'll touch on a bit later. The point is, like the 3D tech, a lot of time and effort went into aspects of the movie that never made it onto the screen. Unfortunately, despite the soundtrack earning more praise than the film itself, part of prioritizing music to convey Baby Doll's feelings ended up hurting her as the identifiable lead character the audience is meant to root for. Get this, Baby Doll does not utter a line of dialogue until 18 minutes into the movie, which is not the best way to introduce the protagonist to an audience and get them to sympathize with their plight. Moreover, by Snyder's own admission, the opening sequence immediately established inconsistencies with Baby Doll that confused the audience. At the beginning of the story, the character is supposed to be naive when it comes to gunplay. Yet, because Emily Brown already underwent weapons training prior to filming the scene, she was too eager to unlearn the tactical expertise during the opening sequence and showcase far better skills than what was called for. Indeed, Snyder seems to know he missed the mark in terms of characterization from the jump, which is one more thing that did not help the movie's cause. In the opening sequence where Baby Doll drops her gun during escape, the shot of the firearm continuously bouncing off the floor and walls took 60 takes to get right. Whether a harbinger of things to come or not, Sucker Punch had production trouble straight out of the gate. Another major miscalculation with Sucker Punch was the movie's marketing campaign and lack of a clear-cut target demographic. Seriously, who was this movie even made for? It's a question raised when the movie appeared on the hilarious podcast How Did This Get Made? And one the promotional rollout for the movie failed to account for ahead of its theatrical release in March 2011. It's possible Warner Brothers had too much faith in Snyder after 300 and Watchmen and simply didn't do its due diligence. It's also possible the poor word of mouth from early reviews sunk the movie's chances before it even launched. It's also possible Snyder simply wanted to make a movie he'd want to see as a fan. All can be true and likely are to varying degrees. Despite whipping fanboys into a frenzy by teasing footage at the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con, releasing a vague trailer in July, and a tie-in Sucker Punch Art of the Film book in February 2011, viewers had very little idea of what to expect when Sucker Punch was set to come out a month later. The subsequent trailers and TV spots only confounded the potential viewers further, showing nothing but a parade of sexy, scantily clad women singing and dancing their way through a hail of bullets. However, once the movie was exposed as being a big, loud, ambitious mess with no emotional core, the movie's misguided marketing became more excusable. That is, the marketing of Sucker Punch made little sense because the movie makes little sense. Full stop. When Sucker Punch was officially released theatrically on March 25, 2011, most critics and general moviegoers agreed it was not Snyder's best. In addition to barely breaking even at the international box office, earning $89.7 million against an $82 million budget, including a paltry $36.3 million in North America, the movie took a massive critical drubbing to the current tune of a paltry 33 Metascore and an abysmal 22% on Rotten Tomatoes. Despite its defenders, the overwhelming consensus is that, despite some scintillating spectacles and marvelous imagery, the lack of a compelling plot and relatable characters resulted in a costly, head-scratching curio people are still trying to make heads or tails of over a decade later. Not to mention how the film was bashed in the press at the time for its misogynistic depiction of women loaded with queasy near-rape fantasies, a disturbing charge leveled several years before the Time's Up and Me Too movements. One can only imagine how the film would fare nowadays, which is why Snyder's recent revival of the Sucker Punch director's cut is almost as dubious as the movie itself. Without echoing the spate of torrid reviews that lambast how poorly women are received in the film, it's more interesting to note how Snyder has been defending the movie retrospectively, including telling the playlist in 2019 that he felt the movie was misunderstood. Part of the movie's failure, in Snyder's eyes, was a key scene deleted from the theatrical release between Baby Doll and High Roller, played by Jon Hamm. According to Emily Browning, quote, "I had a very tame and mild love scene with Jon Hamm. I think it's great for this young girl to actually take control of her sexuality. Well, the MPAA doesn't like that. They don't think a girl should ever be in control of her own sexuality because they're from the Stone Age. They got Zack to edit the scene and make it look less like she's into it. And Zack said he edited it down to the point where it looked like he was taking advantage of her. That's the only way he could get a PG-13, and he said, I don't want to send that message. So they cut the scene. Per Snyder and Browning, The deletion of this pivotal scene is why the PG-13 is so confusing and is one of the chief reasons why Snyder is so interested in releasing the long-awaited director's cut. In February 2021, Snyder sat down with Vanity Fair to discuss his career, and the subject of Sucker Punch was inevitably broached. Quote, "That was the first time where I really faced like a true radical restructuring of the film for it to be more commercial, and there is a director's cut of that movie that is yet to be released. I'll say that out loud." However, in 2020, Snyder told the Film Junkie that fans shouldn't get their hopes up for an official release of Sucker Punch the Snyder Cut, as he did not own the rights to the film and was unsure who did. Regardless of whether the Snyder Cut sees the light of day, Snyder has always maintained his defensive stance that the movie is a critique of everything the movie was criticized for. "I'm always shocked that it's always so badly misunderstood," Snyder said in 2019, adding, "I always said that it was a commentary on sexism and geek culture. Someone would ask me, why did you film the girls that way? And I'd say, well, you did. Sucker Punch is a you to a lot of people who will watch it." As crass as that last sentence sounds, it's worth noting that this is not a face-saving position taken by Snyder retroactively. In fact, he echoed a similar sentiment to Film School Rejects less than a week after the film was released. When asked if the film was a rebuke of sexist geek culture, Snyder said, "It is, absolutely. I find it interesting in a lot of ways that this movie, of all the movies I've made, has been universally hated by fanboys, which I find really interesting. It's like a fanboy indictment in some ways. They can't have fun with the geek culture sexual hangups. Whether fanboy vitriol has waned enough in the last decade to warrant a revived Sucker Punch Snyder Cut is tough to tell, but if Justice League, Army of the Dead, and Army of Thieves are any indication, Snyder might be best served to stick to adapting pre-existing source material with an established IPO in order to remain an A-list director. After all, there seems to be less and less space for original movie ideas in Hollywood in 2022 and beyond. And if Sucker Punch has proved anything, it's that there is even less leeway for bad original movie ideas. Unless, of course, you're Drop Dead Fred. So, as fans continue to await the official Snyder Cut, that's pretty much what the happened to Sucker Punch roughly a decade ago. The first original movie idea from Zack Snyder simply failed to resonate with the masses, both critically and commercially. And the overconfidence of Warner Brothers following the success of Watchmen and 300 led to too much creative freedom and a gross lack of oversight that facilitated the failure. Moreover, the film suffered greatly from an uncertain target audience, a lack of recognizable movie stars, and, due in part to the offensively misogynistic subject matter as well as a mismanaged marketing strategy, couldn't recover from the lethal buzzkill from critics that dashed its chances at the box office. Throw in a pinch of Snyder's, however rightful sense of invincibility following the smashing success of his first 3 movies, and all of it adds up to equal one massive black eye indeed. But hey, that's what sucker punches tend to do.